Hello, everybody, and thank you for attending my presentation. I am assuming now that you see my slides, so let me know if that's not the case. So my name is Ole, and today I'm going to talk about my research on losing and finding the ways in the outdoors in Norway. So I'll be covering some different topics. I'll be starting by allowing myself to get a little bit personal and talk a little bit about my background and a little bit about the context of my research. I'll be talking a little bit about outdoors life in Norway in general and the cultural significance of it. And then I'll focus and zoom in on my research on waylosing and wayfinding behaviors in the context of the outdoors. I'll be summarizing some research results and contributions. And then, of course, I'll be open for questions and discussion towards the end of the presentation. So some facts about me. I am an assistant professor at the Department of Design at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. We are a multi-campus university. I'm at the campus which is in Gjøvik in the eastern part of Norway. The main campus is in Trondheim, a bit further north. My background is in information design, and I have a master's degree from the University of Reading in the UK. I teach design of signage and wayfinding systems for undergraduate and master students of design, and at the same time I have an ongoing PhD project, which is the most relevant part for the talk I'll be doing here today, and the research I am presenting here today is part of my PhD project. As well, I am a casual outdoors user, so I'm no expert. I don't go on long journeys or hikes on my own, but I'm a casual outdoors user. I do hiking and mountain biking in the summer, and I do skiing and what we call fat biking in the winter, so biking on snow in the winter seasons as well. So that's a little bit about me and my background. Then on to Norway and the geography of Norway. So the context of my talk is the geography of mainland Norway. And Norway is a mountainous and long and somewhat narrow country, extending from the latitude of 57 degrees and 58 minutes to 71 degrees and 8 minutes north, and with a land border towards Sweden, Finland, and Russia, and with sea borders to Denmark, the UK, and Iceland. The westernmost point of Norway is at 4 degrees 56 minutes, and the easternmost point is at 31 degrees and 10 minutes east. So Norway actually extends further east than St. Petersburg, Kyiv, and Istanbul. So it's long and narrow and slanted towards the east, we can summarize. Also, if you could fix the southernmost point of Norway and flip the country vertically, it would extend across Europe beyond Rome. So we have a long and extended geography and a lot of mountains and a very, very long coastline dipping in and out of all the fjords and islands along the coast. I am currently living in the eastern part of Norway, in the town of Lillehammer, which is famous for its Winter Olympics and winter sports, and also partly famous for having a TV series, which is a spin-off of The Sopranos called Lillehammer, worth checking out if you haven't seen it. But I grew up on the coast in the southernmost town of Mandal, actually closer to Denmark than to the capital of Oslo. If we zoom in on Mandal on the south coast, we see that it's a coastal harbor town, which in our time is a summer holiday destination. So I spent a lot of my childhood in a traditional wooden boat and sailing a small dinghy along the coast. Here are some pictures. To the left are local variants of the wooden boat type Sørlandssnekke, which I grew up in, these kind of boats. And to the right is a rare picture of my father and me in our boat in the early 80s. The coastline outside of Mandal, it's an archipelago scattered with small islands and skerries and smaller fjords. The skerries make a barrier to the open ocean and calm the waters, but at the same time, underwater skerries and reefs are a real danger. So I cut my teeth at local marine navigation, mostly by using landmarks, signals, and sea charts, but also referring to cardinal directions, especially for determining wind direction, for choice of routes, for determining waves, and for safety. So through my exposure to the elements and spending time at sea, I became aware of and developed a sense of direction in my childhood. My father worked as an electrical engineer and would have access to cabins used at the hydropower plants further inland in the hills and mountains of southern Norway. In the winter, we would go cross-country skiing in these hills and mountains. Mostly, we would navigate by using marked tracks and routes, but we would also always carry a map and a compass to stay oriented and as a safety measure. This picture is of my mother in these mountains in the wintertime while skiing, probably in the late 1970s. This picture is my mother and me hiking the famous Besseggen route, made famous by the playwright Henrik Ibsen in his play Peer Gynt. This is located in the Jotunheimen Mountains of eastern Norway. The picture here was taken in 1984. We have some essential Norwegian terms and sayings. We talk about friluftsliv. Friluftsliv can be translated to outdoors life or spending time in the outdoors. Friluftsliv is important in the lives of many Norwegians, and to break the ice or establish new friendships, we will often invite you on a walk in nature or to spend time at a cabin in nature. The other important term, Norwegian term, is that nordmenn er født med ski på beina, meaning that Norwegians are born with skis on their feet. So this is a kind of a humorous take on the fact that skiing is important for our national identity. And it has been and is still the biggest sport when it comes to fame and sports stars. Most of the famous sporting people in Norway are actually, or the most famous ones, are actually skiers. So skiing has been kind of a national sport. And also the Norwegian Trekking Association, DNT, has been very important in forming our national identity after we gained independence from Sweden in 1905. And there are research on this, which I'm referring to, that you can look into if you're interested in also kind of the cultural aspects on how outdoors life and trekking has been important in forming our national identity. When it comes to skiing, the trends are slowly changing, and climate change has made skiing less common along the coastline. But it's still an important part of our identity, and the traditional cross-country skiing has also been supplemented with more alpine types of skiing, like randonnée and mountain skiing in more extreme terrain, and also park skiing and snowboarding. As for the Norwegian Trekking Association, it manages a network of cabins in the outdoors and mountains where members can lodge both in summer and winter seasons. Trekking or skiing from cabin to cabin is a staple in Norwegian outdoors life. To the left here is a picture from a hiking trip last summer to the area called Lillehammer, and what we see is one of DNT's, or the Norwegian Trekking Association's, cabins called Sprongdalshytta, which is on an altitude of about 1,200 1,300 meters above sea level. Quite barren and isolated, no mobile coverage up there, and this cabin is also unmanned, so you're on a kind of self-service kind of experience. And to the right are example signs maintained by the Norwegian Trekking Association. The local chapter of the Trekking Association will be responsible for these signs, pointing, as you can see, also to the Sprongdalshytta. And as we can see, the cabin is actually, there are wires holding it in place because about 10-15 years ago it was actually blown off the mountain by some strong winds in the wintertime. Anyway, so the Norwegian Trekking Association maintains these paths, and what we see in the picture to the left here is an example T marking painted on rocks indicating the path. So when you go trekking in the outdoors and in the mountains in Norway, you will come across these T marks scattered around the landscape. And the idea being that once you pass one T, you should be able to actually see the next T further on in the landscape to be able to follow these markings, to follow the paths. And in some areas, like in the picture on the left there, the path is not really visible in itself because it's such a rocky rock garden area. So the T's are actually what constitute the path in many areas. In the picture on the right-hand side, we see a bridge built to cross a river gorge. And both the T marking on the left-hand side and the bridge on the right-hand side are examples of the infrastructure kept by the Norwegian Trekking Association in the mountains and outdoors of Norway. In addition, the association also keeps cabins in coastal locations, often in old converted lighthouses. So in addition to being able to go from cabin to cabin in the mountains, you can also go along the coastline and book yourself into lodgings in these cabins as a member of the Trekking Association. The Norwegian Mountain Code is also an important kind of backdrop to what I'll be talking about when I come to the research. The Norwegian Mountain Code was developed by the Norwegian Red Cross and the Norwegian Trekking Association in 1952 after several fatal accidents among skiers and hikers. 15 years later, in 1967, 17 people perished in the mountains during the Easter holidays. So this was a big accident season, the Easter of 1967. This resulted in a revision of the mountain code and campaigning to make people more aware. I remember this campaign was always running through my childhood in the 1970s and 80s. And the result was less accidents in the mountains until we hit a new peak in the winter of 2010 when 9 people died in avalanches in the Norwegian mainland. Accordingly, the mountain code was revised in 2016 to adapt to new outdoors activities with more peaking and randonnée skiing. Also, the threshold for calling for help is a lot lower today, with everyone carrying a phone and with more so-called Instagram tourism to wild places, like, for example, the famous Trolltunga. So we have inexperienced tourists traveling to quite remote areas and then triggering rescue missions. Rescue missions are based on volunteers, and some of the groups are strained to their limit because they have so many call-outs especially during the summer season. So I'm just going to quickly go through the Norwegian Mountain Code to have this as a backdrop. So it consists of 9 points. So technology has changed how the outdoors are used, for example, through what I mentioned as Instagram tourism. Also, the influx of inexperienced tourists has changed the audience for that use our outdoors. And the reliance on smartphones changes how the incoming generations prepare for and conduct trips in the outdoors and in nature. This makes the mountain code even more important and relevant today. So it has 9 points. The first being, plan your trip and inform others about the route you have selected. 2, adapt the planned routes according to ability and conditions. 3, pay attention to the weather and the avalanche warnings. 4, be prepared for bad weather and frost, even on short trips. 5, bring the necessary equipment so you can help yourself and others. 6, choose safe routes, recognize avalanche terrain and unsafe ice. And then point 7, which is especially relevant for my research, use a map and a compass, always know where you are. 8, don't be ashamed to turn around. And 9, conserve your energy and seek shelter if necessary. So this is the code. So with this as a backdrop, I am a casual user of the outdoors. I enjoy trekking in summer and skiing in the winter, as I mentioned, but my main passion is mountain biking, both winter and summer. I'm a part of a group of friends who go mountain biking locally and on trips around the central parts of Norway. Bear with me a little bit more. This is going to lead me into my research interests. I'm just going to share a short video with you of a mountain biking trip. The video is from a mountain bike trip to the Kvam Mountains last September, about a 2-hour drive north from where I live in Lillehammer, right on the border of the Wandene National Park. So as you can see, me and my group of friends, we go riding in quite remote areas. Often we go to places where there might be a bit of paths, but normally there won't be that much marking where we go to explore when we go on these trips in the mountains. So moving on with a picture of me and my friend Svein Erik some years ago. Svein Erik to the right here is our trail finder. He used to be on the Norwegian national team for orienteering. He has developed several GPS and map apps for biking and skiing, with skispor.no as the most popular website for planning skiing trips in freshly set tracks. I am privileged to follow on his trails and trust his navigation and wayfinding skills. But once in the Gålå mountain area near his cabin, where this picture is taken, we got disoriented. The trail had taken us into an area of mountain woods and marshes, and over some time we had actually turned 180 degrees around without noticing. Suddenly our reference landmark, a mountain range, appeared on our left side. We were both determined that we were heading forward with it on our right-hand side. This is a map from the area and a couple of arrows showing our sense of direction and the actual direction that we were heading. We had been so occupied with finding a trail forward and cycling that we had not noticed the turn and had become disoriented. This coincided with the fact that the cardinal direction indicator on Svein Erik's phone had become unreliable. For some time, we were both convinced that the right way forward, actually southwestbound, was northeastbound. It took us some time to accept the fact that our reference point in the landscape, the mountain range, appeared on our wrong side. What to trust? Our view of the reference landmark, our senses of direction, the phone? The situation left us disoriented and bewildered and led me to formulate a research question. What do people do when they are lost? My hypothesis was that most people will try to reorient and solve the situation themselves, but how? So this leads me into the research development, and I'll now be zooming into my research through this long introduction to my research. So getting disoriented while cycling at Gålå and relating it to my field of research and teaching on wayfinding systems. Elucidating on our lost behavior, what we did and how we became lost and how it affected us. What did we do to actually recover from being lost and regain our bearings and our sense of direction? There is an important book within my field called Way Showing by an author called Per Møllerup. And in the book, he states that travelers typically practice random seeking when they have lost their ways and don't have the faintest idea where they are. People's different efforts and use of tools to solve this situation of being lost without involving search and rescue operation was, to our knowledge, not well explored in the literature. So we started to develop this. Further on, I conducted expert interviews with seasoned outdoors people covering skiing, cycling, running, kiting, and trekking, and asking about their experiences of getting disoriented and how they solved this problem while out in nature. Together with my co-supervisor, Frode Wolden, who is a psychologist, I developed a questionnaire survey on wayfinding behaviors, including questions about getting lost in the outdoors. The questionnaire survey had general questions about navigation and wayfinding behaviors and preferences, and it had specific questions about getting disoriented or lost. We asked our respondents to describe how they managed to recover from being lost. So if they had experienced being lost, how did they actually manage to recover from this? And how many had been lost then? The survey received 693 complete responses, and out of these 693 responses, 427 answered that they had experienced being lost. In quotation marks, lost their way, while in the outdoors by choosing either seldom or often as an optional answer. So 392 respondents answered seldom and 35 often, giving a total of 62% of the respondents having experienced losing their ways. And how long were they lost for? A follow-up question, can you remember for how long you experienced not knowing your precise location and what direction you need to move in, was asked. And we received 426 answers to this, with the majority reporting being disoriented for 30 to 60 minutes. The second largest group reported for a few minutes, and close to 5% had been lost for several hours. Thus, 88% of our respondents had been lost for less than 1 hour. So we're talking about a short period of experience disorientation or the feeling of being lost. So what exactly is being lost? And there are several definitions of this in the literature. I will be referring to two of them here. The first one is by Ken Hill. He describes being lost as the lost person is unable to identify or orient his present location with respect to known location and has no effective means or method for reorienting himself. Then Downs and Stea provide a slightly different definition. Orientation refers to the tie between our knowledge of the spatial environment and the environment itself, between cognitive map and real world. We are lost when we are unable to make the necessary link between what we see around us and our cognitive map. So just to make it clear, our respondents have not been lost in Hill's strict definition of the term. They have been disoriented or temporarily experienced to lose their way, and have been able to solve the situation without having to be rescued or found by others. So they haven't actually had a rescue team come rescue them. They solved it on their own terms. So in our questions, we have used the term in a more everyday sense, such as I got lost on my way here, or in the Norwegian term being å gå seg vill, to get lost is kind of a translation of the Norwegian term we used in the questionnaire. So how did they recover then? We added the question 13.2, can you remember how you established your bearings and no longer felt lost? We received 293 written descriptions to these questions. The descriptions were in turn coded and sorted into categories of behaviors. The results of this was published in the Journal of Navigation in a paper called Waylosing and Wayfinding in Outdoors, a typology of wayfinding approaches to problem solving when temporarily lost. This was published last spring in March 2024. So if we go a little bit into the results of our findings that we sorted and established this typology of descriptive categories, we have four main categories of what we name strategies of behaviors that our respondents describe having used to get oriented again. So A, recovery by the use of materials, tools, and technology. B, recovery by reading and interpreting the surroundings. C, recovery by movement. And D, recovery by using existing knowledge and memory. This in turn was then put into a table as a complete typology with the strategies on top, with an A column, a B column, a C column, and a D column. And then in descending order of the number of reported behaviors, we have tactics and moves in each column. So if we look at the leftmost column here, recovery by the use of materials, tools, and technology, the top tactic and move in this category is recovery by using digital maps. And it has to be mentioned that the age brackets of our respondents are the largest age brackets are in the brackets between 20 and 29 and 30 and 39 years old. So we are looking at a slightly younger population as respondents to our questionnaire. So this is no surprise, perhaps, that they turn to digital maps when they feel disoriented and try to solve this. Then if we continue in the leftmost column, then recovery by ordinary maps by using traditional paper maps is the second largest. And then recovery by following marks or signs. Recovery by using a compass had some respondents, and then recovery by using other technologies. And in this category, we had more like exotic technologies, so people describing experiences from using military radio communication systems, for example, or wind indicators as the technology that helped them. Then if we move to the second column, we have the main strategy, recovery by reading and interpreting the surroundings. We have the top reported behavior there is recovery by using terrestrial landmarks. And terrestrial landmarks is here an intended pleonasm, because a landmark can be in navigation, can also be a moving object. So we have kind of specified that it is a fixed object external to the person reporting that we defined as a landmark in this context. And then we have recovery by reading the terrain. So then we differentiated between a specific landmark in the form, for example, of a tower or a cabin or a mountaintop, and then more general descriptions of reading the terrain, like following the flow of water downwards along a stream, or going in or using the direction of a valley, for example. So it's not a specific landmark, it's more a general use or reading of the terrain in general that they used. Then we have a category or a tactic and move that's actually twofold. So it's sorted in two main categories: recovery by ascending to higher ground for view enhancement. So our respondents described that they ascended to higher ground, and by doing that they would get a better overview, and then they could read the terrain or recognize landmarks from this. So this is also in category C. Recovery by reading cardinal directions from the sun, so using the sun to establish cardinal direction. Then the next one is recovery by reading weather phenomena. And this is also a category where we can assume that, or we had in some of the descriptions, the changing weather condition was actually what made the people disoriented in the outset. So it might be that you have a certain whiteout, for example, and then you can wait out the weather to change, and the whiteout lets out, and that is what actually make you feel or make you reestablish your bearings again. But we also had more specific descriptions like reading wind direction or snow drift direction to help them establish direction again. Then we had recovery by using sound or listening for sounds. So the direction, we have a very acute sense of direction in our hearing. So listening to the sound of a waterfall or the sound of a traffic from a distant road, for example, was partly what helped them establish their bearings, or the main factor for them to establish their bearings again. Then we have celestial navigation. Only one respondent that actually described this. If we move on to Category C, we have recovery by movement, the main one there being recovery by general movement. So the respondent describing just moving made them re-establish their bearings, so not a strategic kind of movement, but just moving about, going forwards, going backwards, going around, etc., is what made them re-establish their bearings. Recovery by following a trail, so to continue to move along a trail or finding a new trail, etc. Recovery by backtracking, so going back along a trail or back to a known point where they had passed earlier, is described tactic. And then we again have recovery by ascending to high ground for view enhancement, which is also a kind of movement. And then we have two respondents reporting recovery by moving in circles, so specifically moving circles to establish location and bearings again. And then we have the final category, D, recovery by using existing knowledge and memory, individual or shared. So recovery by social navigation, this might be asking somebody for help. It might be calling somebody to get help with directions. It might be collectively finding the way by cooperating in a group, or it might be seeing other people in the distance. And this is what made them being certain about bearing or direction they were supposed to move in. Then we have recovery by using memory, so referring to previous visits, memorized routes, place names, etc. So where information stored in memory has been actively used to recover the situation. And then the final one was for me a bit surprising, because I'm not that used to having a dog along, but we had three respondents describing that they just let the dog lead the way to solve the situation and recover from being disoriented. On the trip I went last summer, where I showed some images where we went trekking in the mountains in Lillehammer, we actually my friend brought a dog, and I got to experience this firsthand myself as well, because this dog was just amazing. We were in areas where the trail was hard to follow, but the dog was on the trail all the time. So if we were ever in doubt, we could just go where the dog led us, and we would be certain that we would be on the right track. Then we have uncategorized accidental recovery from one respondent. So this is just in there for the purpose of having it, since it was reported. And I just want to make clear that the majority of our respondents described the use of several of these behaviors. So it was not that they could pinpoint necessarily that it was one of these behaviors, but it was often a combination. So it could, for example, be backtracking along the path until we could see a known landmark again, then calling my dad to orient from this landmark. So that would actually be then sorted into three different tactics in this typology, but with backtracking, and then referring to a landmark, and then social navigation by calling somebody to get more information, for example. Then the next one is just the subcategories in the typology ordered by numbers. So here we get independent of which main category they are sorted in, we have the descending order of the numbers of people reporting different behaviors. So a summary of research contributions from this research is general knowledge building on wayfinding and lost persons behaviors. We have identified wayfinding behaviors when disoriented in the outdoors and naming them. Wayfinding when disoriented as a form of problem solving is kind of our take in establishing this typology as well. So our collected descriptions and the typology are an attempt to systematically expand and nuance the definition of lost people approaches as random seeking. Our respondents report using known wayfinding behaviors to reorient themselves. And we also, to a certain degree, match these wayfinding behaviors to behaviors described from other contexts. So already described behaviors from other contexts in the literature is to a large extent used to inform the typology and the naming that we use within the typology as well. So there is an element of matching from this context to other contexts within the research literature. And I'm going to move on now from this the waylosing perspective and refer to some of the other findings we did in this specific questionnaire. So one other finding from the survey was that a lot of our respondents used Google Maps for navigation in the outdoors. Based on this and other findings, we wrote an opinion piece for the Norwegian Broadcasting Company website about the risks of this and about changing habits among people for outdoors navigation. So we underlined the importance of redundancy in tools and information, the importance of paying attention to the surroundings, and the importance of using good maps for the outdoors, also on the phone. So at least in Norway, Google Maps is far from ideal for navigation in the outdoors because the map data is of really low quality in Google Maps when it comes to the outdoors. Google Maps is urban centric in that sense. So it was a bit, I wouldn't say scary, but a bit worrisome to see that a lot of our respondents actually depend on Google Maps also when they are out in the outdoors. So this opinion piece gained a lot of traffic, and I was also interviewed on local and national radio about the risks of being too reliant on low quality data and maps when being in the outdoors. And the somewhat tabloid headline was not our choice, the death by GPS headline, which is a phenomenon that's been described in the literature, but which is also, for most of the examples I've seen from this is actually related to driving and in cars. But the editor at the Norwegian Broadcasting Company insisted on this headline, and it had an effect. So it gained quite a lot of traffic, and as I said, it also spurred interviews for me on national radio about this perspective. I've also conducted other research on wayfinding and navigation recently. So we have looked into wayfinding behaviors among pilgrim tourists in Norway. So we did qualitative research, document studies, interviews, observations, digital ethnography, and we did some quantitative research with a questionnaire survey among pilgrim tourists. So we analyzed the information system of the Norwegian pilgrim paths and matching it with Barker's taxonomy of wayfinding behaviors. That was my last point in the slide. But we analyzed the information system of the Norwegian pilgrim paths as a wayfinding system consisting of signs and marks, maps, digital maps, GPX files, and guidebooks, and collected data on wayfinding behaviors among pilgrim tourists. And then finally, we match these behaviors to Barker's taxonomy, which is published in a paper also in the Journal of Navigation. I presented the results from this research at the 35th International Geographical Congress in Dublin in last August, and we will hopefully publish an article in a special issue of the Journal of Outdoor Recreation and Tourism. It is submitted and it's subject to peer review as we speak. So the St. Olav Ways pilgrim routes in Sweden and Norway all lead to the shrine of St. Olav in Nidaros Cathedral in Trondheim. So this is a map of the routes. And the main path is the Gudbrandsdalsleden path, which goes from Oslo to Trondheim, passing through the central eastern part of Norway. And what's interesting about this path is that it crosses over a wide variety of landscapes. So from dense urban areas in central Oslo, via suburbs, towns, villages, and cultural landscapes, and into forests, valleys, and remote mountain areas. So we have this kind of conceptual continuum, which is also part of my PhD, this idea about this continuum from dense urban man-made areas to complete wilderness on the other end. And of course, all of these different landscape types are all covered by GNSS systems. So you have satellite navigation possibilities inside urban areas and in the complete remote wilderness of the mountains, for example. And the St. Olav Ways have quite an elaborate marking system and a wayfinding system with signs and markings and digital resources and maps and guidebooks. So this is just some examples of the physical markings that you will find out along the paths. And we identified many of the behaviors as defined in Barker's taxonomy of wayfinding behaviors, also among the pilgrim tourists. So we had examples of social behaviors with collaborative seeking finding and social seeking finding. We had examples of semantic behaviors with followed fixed location instructions, following portable instructions, using a portable overview, using a fixed location overview. And we had examples of spatial behaviors using an allocentric frame and screening as well. And as a summary, we did not in the empirical material identify the following behaviors defined by Barker. So asynchronous social seeking finding, sequencing, aiming, and using your cognitive model, but we infer that they can also be applicable for pilgrim tourism. And I think you could argue that it would be kind of almost impossible to do wayfinding or navigation at all without using your cognitive model, but we didn't ask specifically for it, so we don't have it specifically in our empirical material. And I think perhaps I should round off there without going any further to allow for questions and discussion towards the end.